Hey everyone, welcome to Movie Marathons HQ, where we do movie marathons connected to new releases and where we enjoy and review some of our favorite movies. This video is part of the Spider-Man Brand New Day Movie Marathon and the Avengers Doomsday Movie Marathon, where we have been watching one movie every week as we prepare for the release of Spider-Man Brand New Day in July 2026 and Avengers Doomsday in December 2026. Today we are discussing Spider-Man Brand New Day. Released in 2026 and directed by Destin Daniel Cretton, this is the movie that we've been working towards. We've watched a whole ton of Spider-Man movies and Spider-Man universe movies to get to this point, and we've finally reached the end of this movie marathon. This is a spoiler review, so we're going to get into the details of the plot and the characters and all that kind of stuff, so this is your spoiler warning for Spider-Man Brand New Day. Overall, I loved this movie. It tries to do a lot, but I think it succeeds at most of it. It's a version of Tom Holland's Spider-Man that we hadn't seen before, and I think this is his best performance yet and his best characterization yet. This really felt, in a lot of ways, more like comic book Peter Parker and comic book Spider-Man than the Tom Holland movies had previously. In this version of the character, Peter is on his own, he's lonely, he's feeling remorse, not necessarily regret, but remorse over the sacrifices he had to make in Spider-Man No Way Home. And he's really at a low point, but this movie really takes the character and builds on him in a way that's really fulfilling. For positives, I would mention the Spider-Man and Punisher dynamic, which I think was really, really well done and really great, especially a lot of the humor that comes from that relationship. I think the action and the swinging scenes were really well done. There's some new stuff here that we hadn't seen in previous Spider-Man movies, and also bringing back some classic web swinging that we have seen in Spider-Man movies. There's some interesting POV shots and also some shots inside the mask, which we had never seen before. I really like the look of this film. It's very bright, but also really dark. Like it has a lot of shadows, which are really interesting, but it's very colorful and some really interesting choices that they make throughout the look of this movie, as this is a new director. I like parts of the plot. The evolving spider DNA thing is sort of interesting, and then kind of the fact that the villain can't get into Peter's head is pretty unique to this movie and something we hadn't seen before. I really like the supporting characters, Ned and MJ, and how they're brought into this story. And then the emotional highs and lows of this movie, I think, stand out. Then for negatives, I think the villain doesn't work. There's some cool things about the villain, but I just think overall it doesn't work. And I think some of the Punisher's choices and the Hulk's choices don't have consistency with the rest of the MCU. They work for this movie, but I don't think they connect with what we've seen from Punisher and Hulk previously in the MCU. And I don't know where they're going with them, but it just didn't feel consistent there. So I consider that part to be negative. So first is the Punisher Spider-Man dynamic. So we have Tom Holland as Spider-Man and John Bernthal reprises his role as Frank Castle and the Punisher. And they're both based in New York, so it makes sense that they would have run into one another. They just are so opposite that they have a wonderful odd couple dynamic. And so Peter brings MJ to Frank for protection, but he's not into it, but he also has a soft spot for Peter and for Spider-Man. And so throughout the movie, the team ups that they have to do, and they don't seem to want to be together, but then they do kind of want to be together. I think that dynamic really worked and was it produced a lot of the humor of this movie and a lot of the smiles and enjoyment. So I think that character dynamic specifically stands out, even though there are some other ones that are great too. Next, there are some action scenes and some swinging scenes, which are really cool. A lot of the swinging is tried and true things we've seen from all these Spider-Man movies before. But they do have some shots of Peter inside the mask, which is a really cool way to do it. They have some POV shots that I think I first noticed in The Amazing Spider-Man and The Amazing Spider-Man 2. But here, Destin Daniel Cretton brings them back, and it's pretty fun to swing through the city with the POV of Spider-Man. But also some of the action scenes are great. When Hulk actually hulks out in a way that we haven't seen for many years in the MCU, it's really frightening. He does his Hulk clap from the comics, which is really cool. Punisher going through a lot of his action scenes, which he's got such a different movement style than Spider-Man and Hulk. In the beginning, they have the montage of Peter fighting a whole bunch of villains, and they've got some great slow-mo and some recreation of comic book covers and comic book art that's really famous from the Spider-Man comics. So they have some really, really great action here. Um, with those supporting characters and with Spider-Man throughout the whole thing. And then the main villain is kind of a psychological villain, which is like Mysterio. It's not somebody you can just punch your way through that conflict. So I think a lot of the action stands out on its own in this movie. Next, I like the look of this film, which I would attribute to the cinematographer. The cinematographer for this movie was Brett Pollack. And also, there's a new director. So the previous Tom Holland Spider-Man movies were directed by John Watts, who I think did a great job. I like two of those movies quite a bit. But here we have Destin Daniel Cretton, who also directed Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, which is a great looking movie, and also wrote and directed and produced Wonder Man on Disney Plus, which if you haven't watched, I do recommend. It's a really cool show and has some really interesting stuff. It's not super MCU connected, but it's a cool corner of the universe. But anyways, the look of this movie I think is really different than the previous movies. For one, it's very colorful, and Spider-Man's suit, which we'll talk about later, just is bright and vivid and colorful and really interesting to look at. But also, I noticed many shots of this movie where shadows are landing on Spider-Man in a way that makes him so interesting to look at. And just normal scenes that are normally lit, but the way that the shot was constructed puts some deep shadow on Peter, and it kind of pulls that contrast up really, really well. So I think there's some really interesting things that the director and the cinematographer did. So that's another positive. Next, I mainly like the plot of this movie. I like that Peter is kind of going through this life transition, but then also his spider powers are going through a transition. They kind of make it seem like it's a spider DNA thing and whatever. It's a fantasy comic book movie. But I like that his DNA is evolving. I like when he closes his eyes and opens them and they're fully black like a spider's eyes. I think that's really cool. I like that his instinct is first to suppress it, but then you can see it coming a mile away that eventually he's going to accept it and embrace it. Then he has that incredible fight scene with the hand in the prison where he's kind of evolving his spider DNA and almost upgrading his powers in a way, which is really cool. I also like that in this story, New York City feels like it has a major role, almost like a character on its own, where in the comics, Spider-Man and New York City are really connected. But in the movies, they've done some parts in the different movies where New York City has stood on its own, like in the first Spider-Man, when he's about to get taken out by the Green Goblin, but the New Yorkers start throwing garbage at Green Goblin and they say, you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us. I think that's kind of classic New York supporting Spider-Man. And then even in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, there's a few parts where it looks like New York actually embraces him and accepts him. Or sorry, that's The Amazing Spider-Man 1 when the cranes all turn together and so Spider-Man can swing and get to save the day. But here, New York City really loves Spider-Man. They've accepted him, they celebrate him, and he feels it too. There's a beautiful moment at the end when Peter leaves the hospital and he's surrounded by New Yorkers who love Spider-Man. And he gets to feel that for a minute. He stops in the crowd and just feels that energy and makes eye contact with that kid who like waves at him and doesn't know that he's Spider-Man, but Peter gets to experience that. And I think that was a really unique thing of this movie that was deliberately put into the plot. So I like the plot and what they do with the story here. I also like Peter's friends Ned and MJ being back in this movie. At the end of No Way Home, they forgot who Peter Parker was. They know that Spider-Man exists, but they don't know anything about Peter Parker or that they were so close to him. MJ is played by Zendaya and Ned is played by Jacob Batalon. And I think I like that those two continued their friendship. They go to MIT and then Peter's trying to watch them through social media, but he can't connect with them and they don't know who he is. And he's struggling with trying to keep his promise at the end of No Way Home to connect with them and tell them what their story and their history was. But I like that he's conflicted about it. He doesn't know how to do it, so he keeps delaying, and as a result, he keeps isolating himself and only has a few connections through the police officer and through the Punisher. So I like how they used Ned and MJ, and I think they contribute to some of the biggest emotional highs and lows, which is the next positive. Spider-Man Brand New Day has a lot of emotion. I found myself smiling throughout the whole movie, but also I felt myself close to tears in a few moments, really feeling what Peter was feeling. And I want to highlight one part specifically, which I've already given a spoiler warning, but when Jean Grey jumps into MJ's mind and they're on that rooftop and Peter thinks he's actually saved the real MJ. And so then she kind of calls him out that she remembers him and then lifts his mask, and then they do the mask up kiss, which was made famous in the first Spider-Man, even though he's not upside down this time. And then she remembers him, and then Peter is so relieved that he broke through and he's able to finally share his story with her again and have her back in his life. And you just, as an audience member, you feel this like exultation. You're so excited that this happened, but you feel like it's not right. And just then it flips, and MJ starts to taunt him because it's not actually MJ. That was so devastating to experience in the theater. And I think that's one example of so many emotional highs and lows that Peter goes through. That one's definitely a low, but then he kind of gets these moments where he accepts and he gets to be celebrated by New York City. He and Frank decide that they are actually friends and they care for one another as different as they are. So really this movie goes through a lot of emotions in a way that is kind of unique. The other Spider-Man movies did have emotion, of course, but this one really turned it up. And I love that about this movie. And then for negatives, I think the villain in this movie, I think, works but doesn't work. The villain works because if the villain were just called, I don't know, Thomas, which is my name, if the villain were just a character called Thomas who had this mind control ability and could jump from person to person to person and did all these things, I think it would work. It might not be interesting, but it would work. I think it gets complicated when the character is Jean Grey. Jean Grey is a major figure in the X-Men comics and a hero. For her to be introduced in this in a Spider-Man movie, to begin with, just feels strange and feels like that doesn't fit. But forget it, she was introduced in this movie. She did some horrible things. I understand that she was motivated by desperation and she was trying to find her sister whom she believed was alive and she believed that she could save her. So that kind of desperation would cause people to do some crazy things. But she rigged a bomb inside a tank and mind controlled somebody to drive the tank through the city, putting many people's lives at risk. And then the bomb blows up in damage control and harms people or destroys property or whatever. She mind controls somebody to walk into traffic. She mind controls MJ to step off of a building, and Peter saves her, but what if he didn't? However that mind-controlled person got out of the helicopter, I don't know, but the only thing I can think of is that MJ made that person just jump out of the helicopter to their demise and then mind jump before hitting the ground. That's the only thing I can think of that makes sense. It just seems like if this is a hero character and this is what she's done in this movie, it's going to be very hard, I think, for the audience to believe that she can be redeemed. It's not impossible, and maybe the overall plan is to not redeem the character, but because she's introduced as Jean Grey and we know Jean Grey from the comics, it's hard to separate that. And it just feels like this was a truly villainous villain, but is supposed to be a hero. And maybe it's a subversion thing and she's not going to be a hero. And if that's how the plan is and it ends up working later on, then great. Just at this point, it feels like it doesn't work. I also think her wig / hairstyle looks really bad in the beginning. Later, when it's back in a ponytail, she looks good. And Sadie Sink is a great actress and does the role well. I just don't know about the characterization there for the villain. The next negatives are things that I think work in this movie, but they don't work in the larger MCU. So first, the Punisher. Officially in the MCU, for sure, we have The Punisher One Last Kill, which was a special presentation that was released earlier this year, and also sort of Daredevil Born Again. In season 2, we get some Frank Castle, which kind of builds on the Netflix version where we had John Bernthal as Punisher, and then his own 2 seasons of the Punisher TV show. That's all like kind of sort of canon, but for sure One Last Kill is. And so in this movie, I think the Punisher works. His dynamic with Spider-Man is great, and the 2 characters work off each other really well. But like, he feels remorse. He's just kind of sappy, when what we've seen from Punisher before is not that he's a heartless maniac. He knows what he's doing. He has just decided to punish himself for his failures by being this one-man judge, jury, and executioner. And he has done some horrible things within the MCU. So then here it just feels inconsistent with what we've seen from him before. In this movie, he works. He talks about how he has a family, but he's very private and very angry about it. Clearly, he's lost them. And then he says to Peter that this isn't a lifestyle he chose. This is his life sentence for what happened to him, that he feels he's compelled to be a Punisher. But it just doesn't really work. And then also at the end of the movie, when he tries to shoot Jean Grey, I think that works because his thing is, I don't want to catch these bad guys to put them in prison just for them to break out and cause more harm. I want to put them away for good. So I get that he uses the gun on her, but then he hits Peter and he feels bad. I'm okay with him feeling bad, but then he brings him to a hospital. Wouldn't he be arrested on site? This guy is a major criminal at large who should be in prison for the rest of his life. Yet he's able to go into this hospital, bring in somebody, and then he like hangs out for a few days. And then once Peter slips out and gets to enjoy his moment with New York City, and the New Yorkers out there, Frank is still in there with the Spider-Man mask. How does he get out and not get arrested? So I just feel like in the movie, Frank Castle and Punisher works, but I just don't know if it's consistent with what we've seen from Punisher before. And I don't know how it would work that he does what he's able to do if he is the character we've seen previously in the MCU. And similar to that, we see Bruce Banner and Hulk in this movie, played by Mark Ruffalo. And I think we're getting to the point where Mark Ruffalo has played Bruce Banner in more MCU projects than any other actor has played a role. I need to total it up, but I think this puts him above where he's been Bruce Banner in so many projects. He's appeared more than anybody. Anyways, in this movie, it works that he's a professor. Peter knows him from the Avengers, but Bruce Banner doesn't know Peter. So he poses as a student and asks him about the DNA suppression thing because he's built an inhibitor that he keeps on his wrist so he can stay in human form. And then Peter learns about that. He makes his own inhibitor thing, but then it backfires. And then when Hulk is unleashed by Jean Grey, Peter tries to use the inhibitor on the Hulk because that should work. He made a universal one, but it doesn't work, and all this stuff happens. I think that works in the context of this movie. But if we look at the Hulk's storyline throughout the MCU, he's been afraid of the Hulk all this time. He says he's always angry in the Avengers, and he can somehow control hulking out because he's always angry. But then he's kind of lost control, and then in Avengers: Age of Ultron, the Scarlet Witch unleashes him on the city, and he's scared of that. And then in Thor Ragnarok, he's been the Hulk for 2 years and almost forgets who Banner is. And then in Infinity War, he hulks out and gets his butt kicked by Thanos, and then Hulk is afraid of fighting Thanos because of that. And then between Infinity War and Endgame, Bruce Banner says that he stopped looking at the Hulk as a disease, and started looking at him as the cure. He says he spent 6 months in the Gamma Lab, whatever that is, and he was able to merge the Hulk and the Banner personality, so he has the best of both worlds. Then he saves the day by using the Infinity Stones to snap everyone back. So we also see him in the Disney Plus show She-Hulk, and he's still in the Smart Hulk form, and he seems happy with that. But then in Brand New Day, somehow he's gone through a character evolution where he's like, no, I'd rather be human. I'll make an inhibitor thing that's going to work. And he's going to trust in this little wristband technology thing, even though he couldn't trust anything else he's tried before. They had the lullaby from Black Widow in Age of Ultron. That was another weird kind of control thing, but now in this movie, he's solved it, I guess. So I think the Hulk works wonderfully well in the context of this movie. When he's Banner form, when he's Hulk form, it looks great, it feels great, and it works for this movie. But I just feel like, yeah, I guess he's just wants to be human now and doesn't want to ever be Hulk again. I don't know when the next time is that we're going to see Bruce Banner and the Hulk, so I don't know where they're going with the character, and maybe they'll make it make sense when he reappears later on. But just I felt for this movie, it doesn't seem consistent with what we've seen from the character previously. Now let's talk about the costume. Here in this movie, we have a new costume for Spider-Man. It's one that he created by himself at the end of Spider-Man No Way Home, and we see it for a brief minute there, but I didn't comment on it because we hadn't seen it in action. Now in Brand New Day, we see a whole movie with him in the suit, and I have to say this suit is amazing. It's beautiful, and it's perfect in pretty much every way it can be. I really think the reds and the blues look great. The webbing that he has on the suit is somewhat raised. It's not quite as raised as the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man costume. But it also has some really interesting angles in the design of where the red meets the blue. That's taken from the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man costume. So it's really cool that he seems to have taken inspiration from both Peter 2 and Peter 3, as he called them, in making his own suit. I think that's really cool, but he keeps his awesome eyes that have the lenses which open and close, which allows him to be really expressive. I also noticed that in this movie, there's a few parts where the camera is close enough and the lighting is correct enough that you can see Tom Holland's eyes through the lenses, which I think was really cool because really it's like he's wearing a helmet or a face covering, but when you can see the eyes, you see some human peek through it. And I thought that was really cool. We've never seen anything like that before. So I think the costume looks great. He's got some really cool web shooters that he's designed and put on his costume. Again, taking inspiration from Peter 3 in No Way Home. But then as part of the plot, he develops organic webbing like Peter 2. So it's just a really cool costume that works and it has built on the other Spider-Man. The only thing I don't like about it is he's got an AI assistant in his suit that he calls Evie. It must have been one that he invented himself. And we know that this version of Peter is very smart, but we don't know how smart. And I don't know how easy it is to create an AI assistant, but it just seems like in the other suits he had AI, but it was Tony Stark tech, which you just can accept more readily. But here I don't know how he has an AI that's quite so sophisticated if it's a suit that he made in his bedroom with meager resources and circumstances. So I think it looks great. I just don't like the AI in it. But if I were to rank it, this one is either better than the Amazing Spider-Man 2 suit, which was my previous favorite, or it's just below. But it's very neck and neck between the Brand New Day suit and the Amazing Spider-Man 2 suit. Now, how might Spider-Man Brand New Day connect to Avengers Doomsday? Interestingly, none of the main characters in this movie are on the cast list for Avengers Doomsday. Tom Holland is not on there. John Bernthal's not on there. Mark Ruffalo's not on there. Sadie Sink's not on there. Zendaya and Jacob Batalon are not on there. So nobody in this movie has a role in Avengers Doomsday. Fans have been wondering why Spider-Man would not be part of Avengers Doomsday, especially since Dr. Doom is played by Robert Downey Jr., who played Iron Man, who had a very strong connection with Peter Parker. So interestingly, they don't seem to be playing on that unless Spider-Man appears in a small cameo, but he's not going to be in it. I also find it interesting. I thought that maybe he's not in it because he died at the end of this movie when the Punisher shot him. But of course he didn't die. But I thought that would be a reason why he's excluded. So that's my review of Spider-Man Brand New Day. What did you think of this movie, and how did you think the other Spider-Man movies connected to this movie? And how do you think Spider-Man Brand New Day may connect to Avengers Doomsday? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. Follow Movie Marathon's HQ on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and also on Letterboxd. This concludes the Spider-Man Brand New Day movie marathon. I think if I were to rank them all, I think I would say Spider-Man No Way Home is still my favorite Spider-Man movie, but I think this one is my second favorite of the Tom Holland movies, then Spider-Man Far From Home, then Spider-Man Homecoming. My favorite Andrew Garfield Spider-Man is The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and then The Amazing Spider-Man 1. My favorite from Tobey Maguire is Spider-Man 2, then Spider-Man 1, then Spider-Man 3. As far as the Venom movies, I think I like Venom, then Venom The Last Dance, then Venom Let There Be Carnage. I can't really rank them all together because they're so different, but because I do like the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, 3 of the 4 of them, quite a lot, I think I have to say he is now my favorite Spider-Man. It also is a good thing that he shares my name. That's another positive, that we both share the same first name. So thank you for joining me on this Spider-Man Brand New Day movie marathon. And there is no next movie in this marathon, but the Avengers Doomsday Movie Marathon will continue. And depending on when you watch this, we're kind of around the Infinity War, Ant-Man and the Wasp, and Endgame era. So depending on when you watch this, we're around there. See you at the movies.